Hello and welcome to a new guide for MEIOU in Texas in Europa Universalis. My name is Corliss and I'm going to talk about population growth and fulfillment values, which is based on a question that has reached me in the Discord, where it basically was asked like, how does it actually work, and I don't understand it, and like, can you explain it maybe a bit more? It was a new player, so thank you for that question. And I'm going to explain a bit how you can manage your population better in detail and understand what kind of stuff you need to look for to make your realm as populous as possible and grow nice and large cities. Now, the first thing you need to check, and that's basically already the key thing to check, is the population tab here. We already looked at it before in a different episode. And you can see here in the example of Prague, I picked Bohemia because it's relatively rich at the beginning, so it's an easy nation to play. If you want to pick up this mod as your first campaign, basically Bohemia is fun. I would always recommend Naples though, but it's similar. Now, peasants, residents, burghers, nobles, and clergy are present here. And we see that there are birth values, which are thankfully positive, but we also have emigration values, so they are moving away, and we have immigration, so residents are moving in. Now, and the question is, like, why does it happen, and how can I maybe improve on that? How can I make it bigger or smaller, whatever? And the values you need to look for are the needs values, which are in the bottom half. So you see there's food, life, comfort, and luxury. And these are fulfillment values or need values per capita, so per person, what they can buy, actually. So a peasant currently has 156.5 fulfillment on their food need and 104.7 on their life need. So they can survive, but they are not really rich, and comfort and luxury is not really to speak of. However, our residents, they have 253% and 202% on life needs and 90% on comfort and 16% on luxury. They are a lot richer compared to a peasant. And that's also explaining why there is immigration. So from other provinces and this province, peasants are moving in, or residents, could also be residents from other provinces, move in to become a resident in this province because they can earn more money there and make a better living. And that's also the main magic here, because now the question is, okay, what is food and life, and what is comfort and luxury? And there's one thing to know: for population growth, only food and life are key or important. So food is obvious food, and life needs, what are that? Let's check it out. You can go to the trade screen here, and on page 3 you see the amount of demanded goods in this province, and you also see the category of the goods. For example, food, salt, and fiber are all life needs. So if you want to grow your population, that's the only 3 things you need to care about: having enough food, having enough salt, having enough fiber, and making these ones cheap. You can also see here what kind of population demands how much and how much they got, actually. So for example, we can see here also with the residents that they are buying a lot more than they actually need, because 5.87 is the 100% they would need to survive, and they can almost buy 3 times that. While, for example, the peasantry is struggling partially. And salt is there. Peasantry is also struggling to get enough salt currently. But yeah, so they are trying to get stuff, but they are not rich enough, or the market is not rich enough in goods for them. And so you really want to make sure that you can grow your supply of food and also make your population rich enough to buy that. So for example, food prices are rising currently here. And food with 4.8 and salt with 5.4 are relatively expensive. So for example, let's compare it to another node over here, Krakow. If you check prices here, we see that food is only 4.5, which is 0.3 cheaper, and salt is only 4.9. And that's how much difference? Yeah, 0.5 almost. So even they are very close by, the price difference here is already noticeable. And if we go to another node here, which is, no, they're in the same actually. But even here we have a small price difference between Vienna and Prague. And if you, for example, go to Lübeck, which has a very good trade connection due to the Hansa, we can see here that the food price is 4.6 and the sold price is 4.7, so even different again. And that's what you want to keep an eye on. You want to make that as cheap as possible, which also offers the opportunity to sell it to other nations when their food price is higher than yours. So commerce will also be happy about that, because then they have something to sell. But basically, if you want to grow your population, these three things are very important. The needs values here also explain why, for example, burgers and nobles, the values are so much higher. Because the needs are per capita, so per population, per person. And of course, a burger is on average a lot richer than one peasant alone. Therefore, he can buy a lot more than someone like a peasant could. So in this case, the peasants are getting 156% roughly of their food supply, and the burgers can buy 600% of what they would need to survive. And therefore, these burgers are, of course, a lot richer, and they buy a lot of comfort and luxury goods, as we can see here. They are also your main driver for comfort and luxury demand early on, because these are the only people who can afford significant amounts of that. Residents also can buy a lot if they get rich enough. In this case, we have a very rich city with Prague. Let's switch that song. I really don't like it. Okay, and now immigration is also, of course, based on these values, but immigration also looks at the comfort value. So basically, if you have peasants or residents or burghers, the comfort value also plays a role. So if, for example, a peasant could migrate or wants to migrate, then it will check other provinces for its values of food, life, and comfort. For example, we pick a peasant here. I think there was a lot of migration here. Yeah, exactly. So they have 128 food supply or need, 86% life needs, and 14% comfort. Basically, they are really, really poor and starting to die off naturally, because on average they are below 100. Or at least in the food and life need, which are the only thing we look at. And a lot of them want to go. Part of them go into the residence here in this province, but a lot go into other provinces. And part of that could be Prague. So we can see here that Prague gets 0.439 immigration of residents, which is completely depending on these food, life, and comfort values, and they are relatively high. Therefore, the peasants want to move to Prague and therefore grow that city. Actually, the residents are so rich that they also grow naturally, which has to do with the amenities in this province. As we can see here, the ideal value of residents is 86,000, because we have amenities rank 3 and even more than that. So we have a lot of structures present there, like sanitary and water sources or whatever, for a safe city where they are disease-free, more or less. So people can naturally grow, and they also can accept immigrants because they are not over their cap of residents. And therefore, Prague is growing by 0.439 thousand residents per year currently, alone from immigration. The same is for the burghers, but the burgher growth is relatively small always. So if you, for example, look at Venice here, they probably have some... Yeah, we can see here that they have a promotion from the residents, and they have a little bit of a decay on growth. So they are shrinking naturally because their fulfillment values are not high enough. Now, if we just look at peasants and residents, what you want to aim for, if you want to max out growth, then it's food at 240 or 250%. And life needs also as high as possible. I think the cap here is also 200 or 240%. So basically, these residents here in Prague are almost at the maximum for natural growth, while the peasants are far away from it. So you really basically need 2.5 of the values they want to consume. The details about that are actually here. You can check it out here. Don't be surprised that they sometimes don't exactly add up, because we have some rounding issues sometimes, but also some values are only updated within the year or after a yearly tick, so there might be small differences between everything. Now, how can you make your peasants richer in the end? There are two ways. The early game way, which is basically the only you have access to, is improving the wages they earn. Which means that you can check here on the page 4 of population what the wage is for rural labor. So if they have something to work on, they earn money. Early on, the state and the commoner properties are very low. So lower class only owns 29%, which means that the nobles are basically siphoning away all the wealth they can make on the farmland, for example, into their own pockets, and the peasants will not get a lot from that. They only get the wages. Later on, when you reform your nobility and the rural governance, most importantly, then the peasantry can own property and will not give away all profits to the nobles from there. Very important. So early on, probably your peasants will be bought out, or it's called commoners here, or lower classes. So it will not make a lot of sense to actually take away property from the nobles and give it to the peasantry, because in the end, the nobility will get all the profits and just buy back the property from the peasants again. So they will just invest their wealth there, and you basically want your nobles to invest their wealth somewhere else, like building up infrastructure, like irrigations, for example. Irrigations, of course, increase the profitability of a job, but they also produce more peasant labor in this province, therefore driving up wages and so on. So everything has some kind of feedback loop within the economy. The only problem here of Prague, for example, is that actually the resources are maxed out, so the farmlands are maxed out and forestries are not really available here. But there are other provinces like this one here, where you have farmland and forestries available. I already invested some stuff. So basically to showcase, okay, you would now invest money into it to make it grow and therefore attract more peasants to move in. And that's basically how you can grow specific provinces, by using the macro builder, and here, for example, then investing more money into the province. So now it went up to 35 invested money here. And that way you can push up wages, because more resident or rural labor is required, depending on what you invested into. Of course, infrastructure projects also generate labor requirements, but they will be gone after the infrastructure project is done, so you have to be careful with that. But basically, making a little bit of irrigation is relatively cheap, introduces a higher efficiency on your crop industry, for example, therefore making crop a little bit cheaper in that province, and so on. Basically producing these kind of feedback loops in your economy. And so if you, for example, have a province that is really shrinking and you are not sure what you could do here, for example, this one, you maybe want to actually accept that it can't do much. You can invest a bit of money here into farmlands to max it out now, but in the end, you only want to make sure that they are positive in growth and birth rate. If they emigrate away, that's fine, because they will become residents or peasants somewhere else. That's in your interest. Just make sure that they don't shrink. And so you can really optimize your growth that way. As a last note before I finish up here, be sure that if, for example, a disease hits your provinces, population will, for example, die out. We had a plague here, as we can see here. So labor prices will go up because you suddenly have empty farmland to work. And this will also then change, for example, immigration and migration and fulfillment values, because they suddenly can't afford stuff, or they can suddenly afford more because wages are higher in these kind of empty provinces. And that's always to keep in mind. Also, if you go to war, your peasants are most likely the military you are currently using. So for example, we see here the feudal levy army, which is mostly driven by noble peasants. So actually they are using population from your province here. If they die, you also lose labor here and population in reality, which can in return drive up prices or cause any other kind of unwanted impacts of things, like you suddenly can't sustain your infrastructure because you don't have enough labor to do it. For example, irrigation would be one example. But also the infrastructure pools which are funded by the profits of your industries. I think it's in the property tab here. Yeah, infrastructure fund. That could also lead to problems. Because your population shrank, your profits go down, and suddenly you can't upkeep the infrastructure you have in this province. Yeah, so a lot of things that tie into the economy one way or the other. And, well, I hope that helps to what you need to look out for to grow your population. In the end, it always comes down to trade, make food, salt, and fiber as cheap as possible, and produce as much as possible of it. And with that, leave a like and subscribe, and see you in the next guide.